everybody gathered here in the room and online today. Thanks for coming. I'm Sarah Jo James. I'm the development manager at Rosie the Riveter Trust. Can everybody hear me okay? Can we get some more volume, Jared? All right, how about now? All right, perfect. Again, thanks for joining us. I am Sarah Jo James, the development manager of Rosie the Riveter Trust. And I just wanted to do a quick introduction of what we do and some of our teammates that are here today. I do see some familiar faces. But number one is the staff of the trust. We're a small but mighty team. And I'll just do some quick introductions. If you could hold any clapping until I get through them all. We do have Molly, our product marketing manager. Be sure to see her to grab some souvenirs at the end of this. Leo, our program manager, who runs all the youth programs for Rosie the Riveter Trust. We have Kaylin, the superintendent of the national park that we are partnered with. We have our board president incoming for 2024, Michelle Fideli. Our gala chair, Michelle Pryor-Alameda. Our executive director, Sarah Pritchard. And I'm sorry if I'm missing anybody from here. That's who I see. But that is the team that puts together Rosie the Riveter Trust on a daily basis. We are the official nonprofit of Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, which is only the second longest park name in the registry. Practice saying it 3 times fast. And our short mantra is to preserve history, share stories, and inspire youth. And one of those stories I'm so glad to share today is with Shelley Blanton-Stroud. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I'm going to pass it to Shelley for some brief introduction about, just some background, how we got here today and this stage, and we'll go forward into the book from there.
I'm so happy to see your faces, and I can't tell you how happy I am to see so many costumes. Wow, that's amazing. I have been writing the Jane Benjamin novels. The poster girl that I'm here to talk about tonight is the 3rd in a trilogy. They all feature my protagonist, Jane Benjamin. The first one takes place in 1937, inspired by my father's experience during the Dust Bowl. And it begins with that and veers into all kinds of violence and mayhem. I'm not blaming him for that. But my second book takes place in 1939 and features a woman who's not unlike Dorothea Lange, the WPA documentary photographer. I'm sorry, that's my first book. My second book features a character inspired by Alice Marble, who is the last woman to win Wimbledon before World War II began. And then this book, Poster Girl, takes place in 1942 in your beloved Shipyards. And before I started writing these books, like the first one came out in 2022, 2020. So it's been 3 years, 3 books. I'm a little bit tired. Before that, I've been a college writing instructor for 34 years, mostly at Sacramento State. And stingers up, yep. And then, more over here, wow. Gosh, I'm thrilled, I can't go on. I was born and raised in Bakersfield, California, around a lot of family stories. And one thing I knew was that my family could tell a story. And the whole time I was a teacher, I felt this hankering to tell my own stories. And so when I was about 50, my husband right there, who's fine now, had heart failure while scuba diving with our sons. And at that point, we figured, if there's something we want to do, we better do it. And that's when I really started writing. So that's how I got to writing these books. How did I get to the Rosie the Riveter Foundation or Trust? Is that I didn't know this when I began, but I discovered my real subject matter is ambitious, gritty women in history. I'm surrounded by young women all the time, all those years teaching, and my son's partners also. And so even today, I discover how difficult it is to be an ambitious young woman with dreams of proving her own competence in the world, but also dreams of being maybe a parent and a lover and a community member. It's very hard today to do all of those things. And what I've really learned was it was so much harder in history. And so when I discovered that that was really the central thread of my writing, and I knew I wanted the next book to take place in 1942, it was pretty darn obvious there would be Rosies in that book. So that's what brought me to the Rosie the Riveter Trust. Thank you.
Awesome. And then just to talk a little bit more about this program, Rosie Presents, we actually met Shelley through a previous installment of this program, so do stay tuned with us. It's oftentimes virtual and online, but occasionally we do get together in person. And so Shelley did get to come to one, approach me, and that's how we got the conversation started with her series and what could we do to collaborate to kind of get the word out, not only about her books, but also about the park and the trust, the programs that we run. So yeah, stay tuned. If you are not already on our email list, please do get on it. And I just wanted to point out too, you referenced the park as like a big inspiration for the book, or at least a place of research. So can you just navigate us through like maybe your first time visiting the visitor center?
The first time I visited the center, it actually honed in my expectation for the slice of this time that I would begin by talking about. And that was, you have in that main room, like that's near the bookstore, the gift shop, there is a big binder that has pictures of propaganda, posters. There are so many posters. One of my favorites that was in that book related to Her Talk Kills, something like that. It's a gorgeous woman looking like she's maybe a little too chatty. And the line was like, she's a killer because she talks. And I started getting really fascinated looking at the World War II era posters that were sending a message that the government and the military needed sent for their World War II purposes. And that's kind of what started steering me toward the idea that of a poster girl, the program to promote a government objective by using posters and kind of pop media. So that was really from the very first visit I made there.
Great. And just in that research and preparing for writing this novel, did you uncover anything very surprising from the history, or what does that trigger for you?
Of course, everything is a surprise when you start going down that rabbit hole. I know you know this from your own experience on the internet, but a couple things I would bring up. One is, through that research, I discovered what probably everyone in this room knows about Betty Reed Soskin and what a role she has played at this museum and what a national leader she really is. If you don't know about her, she recently retired from being what was the oldest living national park ranger in the United States, and she was on site in this time period, and she's a beautiful, articulate leader of a woman. I read her biography and was just blown away. I'm not someone who can write a book about her. I already had a protagonist. I already had an arc that was happening. But I knew I had to put someone who reflected a little bit of Betty Soskin in the book. And so she inspired my character of Belva. I will say her biography inspired it. Another thing that kind of surprised me in the research was I was kind of struggling. I've talked to, hey, you all, there are authors in this room. I've had about 5 conversations with people who are writing historical fiction right now, so you know how it works. Especially if you write crime in your novels, it is funny to start looking for ways to kill somebody. And I was kind of struggling. How would I get my Wendy the Welders killed? So it turned out that the Bureau of Labor, the Federal Bureau of Labor, wrote a report called Cause of Death 1943 and 1944 for women shipyard workers. I mean, it was like they wrote it for me all those decades ago. And in that report, I discovered that the first most common way for a woman welder to die in 1943 and 44 was from a fall. And the third most common way was through contact with electricity. Both of those made it into the book. So.
Yeah, and speaking to those work conditions, I know you could not have been there, but I read the book and you really take the reader to that place. I couldn't have had a better visual for some of these, sets, I guess. And then the celebrations also. So I really can't wait to share this with some of our real life Rosies, because I feel like they're going to go right back there. And just talk us through the celebration portion, especially. Like, were you looking at photos to make this happen? I really do feel like the essence of celebration in those moments.
I love that, because really, I'm good at celebrating. I do know how to celebrate, sometimes too much. You'll notice I'm not celebrating that much tonight. So it was never hard for me to come up in my 3 books with party scenes or toasts or that kind of thing. There were other things that were very hard. It was very hard. You mentioned the setting of the shipyard. That was very hard for me. I've had absolutely no personal experience of doing that kind of labor ever. And so there were so many books I needed to read about how did it work? This takes place during a 5-day competition to build a Liberty ship faster than has ever been built before. And in real life, it did happen in 5 days, and that record still stands. So there are a lot of documents that describe literally how they did it, but it's hard to picture it. And so I was able to turn up some very old documentaries that showed, the hull flying in on cranes and being lowered and all of that. There's no problem you've got as a writer that a little research won't help you fix. Yeah.
So you mentioned Betty. We all love Betty. Were there other references in this book? And whether that was Betty or others, what was the balance in portraying them in an accurate way, but also this is a work of fiction. Yeah. So how do you balance that?
I love that you bring up the word accurate. And I know that there are many history writing people in here and also history reading people here. Well, you're probably aware that in historical fiction, among writers, there's kind of a continuum about your approach to accuracy. And my place on the continuum is that I do lots and lots of research, and I want to be true to the way things are. But I regard myself as an entertainer in these books. My books are murder mysteries. You need to keep flipping those pages. You need to be interested. You need to stay up late. I cannot lose you because I'm being hyper precisely accurate. An example of that might be of the last book, but it's a really good example. I needed my character Jane to get from from San Francisco to New York City on a train in 5 days to catch the RMS Queen Mary. And I had no idea how to make that happen on this date. So I reached out to the California Train Museum in Sacramento and the librarian, and he said, let me put a couple of volunteers on it. Kind of forgot that he had said that. 2 weeks later, I got a 19-page single-spaced document from 2 volunteers, and the title was, Let's Get Jane to New York. And it was, for someone who likes historical detail, it was gorgeous. I mean, it had every possible train, where the way stations were, what was the upholstery in each kind of train, how much was a ham sandwich, where would you sleep, how would you sleep, everything. I was thrilled, and I just poured it all in there. I loved it so much. Oh my gosh. I turned it into my editor, and she responded, I love it. It's fantastic. You know we're going to cut it, right? Because everything in this story stopped while I talked about real-life accurate trains for a while. So when you talk about accuracy, what's important to me is to know the accurate facts of a historical event and the people who lived in that setting, and then to craft characters and an event that is authentic, but not precisely the same. So what that might mean is that, as you've said, there are people who are characters in my books are inspired by real life people, and there are others who get to still keep their name, and the real life person is in the book. And the way I made that decision is that if what I needed that character to do was way out of context for who the real person would be, that couldn't happen. An example, so in the novel, it's set in the shipyards, and they're called the Low Shipyards, because I was terrifically inspired by the history of Henry J. Kaiser. A lot of that history went into this book. But Henry J. Kaiser is not a suspect for murder. Henry J. Kaiser was not the womanizer I needed him to be. So he was not going to be Henry J. Kaiser. He had to be Adam Lowe instead, which I think might have been a name from a character on All My Children at one point. I'm not sure. I think that's where it comes from. So that would be an example of inspiration by a real character that I have to fictionalize because it's just not appropriate to do that to their memory.
Awesome. That's a well answered. And so thank you. And I just want to take a minute to think about our real life Rosie friends for a moment. It really does just connect me with them reading through these novels, even in a fun way. Like, I think they would like to see themselves in the murder mystery, you know? Like, how often do you get that representation? So we did put some cards out on the tables. They are for show, but I just want you to look at how young some of those faces are. This book has a lot of young characters, but not all. And you can see the diversity. You can see, again, some of these kids lied about their age at 16 and 17 years old to go into work for the shipyards. And yeah, I just wanted to ask again, like, how did you find that well-rounded but capture that young age with your characters?
First of all, I did have a lot of years teaching 18 to 21-year-olds, so that was like my wheelhouse. But also about their different personalities in that same age, because it's not like all 20-year-old women are the same. They're not. So what I do when I'm writing characters, I like to have. It's important to me to have that murder mystery gratify you. The revelations, the discoveries, the clues. But that's not enough to make it fun for me. For it to be really pleasurable to write these things, I like to have themes that I get to play around with. So, for instance, when I know, I want to consider the possibility that there are different reasons for a young woman to arrive at the shipyards and sign up to be a welder. So the way I do this is I almost picture a daisy. So, and I, put on a big piece of paper, the middle of the daisy might be this thing I'm interested in. So, for instance, patriotism, why weld? Right? That kind of question I've got. Then each central character that I'm going to feature around that question is like a petal on that daisy. And they're all connected by that question, but I can't let any of them be the same in response to it, because that would be boring and repetitive and unnecessary, like I just was, boring, repetitive, unnecessary. So an example would be if the question at the middle of that daisy is why would a 20-year-old find herself here welding these ships, then I tell myself, well, one of them has got to be just purely patriotic. She's just got to feel the fervor and want to commune with her other young people who are throwing themselves into this cause to be joined for something bigger than them. Okay, good. I need another petal. I need another young woman who, dang, she needs the money. She needs the money. And getting a union job on the shipyards paid her what she needed. Okay, that's another reason to be here. Another one might be an adventurer. I've got a young woman who just wants to try new things, meet new people. Maybe someone else who wants to prove to the world that she's capable of what's very difficult. So it's not that hard for me to come up with a variety of young women when I know they'll all be answering similar questions in their behavior, but they'll answer them differently.
And then just one fun quote from one of our real life Rosies, May Cryer on the East Coast. I actually see her little card over here on this table. She said, "We worked all day and danced all night." So I do think these characters kind of resemble that, and they still have a social life on top of their, joining up to work. And then something else that really came through for me was the clothing. I have pictures at the visitor center of women, with their hands on their hips, and they're showing off wearing pants for the first time. That's their first pair of pants, and it was an exciting thing. And so you'll get a lot of that throughout this book. But I did want to talk to you about your choices, and they're wearing a lot of men's clothes because those weren't made for women yet and stuff like this. So yeah, just walk us through that process.
Did you want me to read that passage?
Yeah, we do have a reading for you today.
All right. This one, I think Sarah Jo chose particularly because of the clothes issue. So it's at the beginning of the book. There's this big celebration at the outset of this contest to build the fast Liberty ship. All the press is there. It's a big deal. Lots of bands, all that stuff. But then something surprising happens where Adam Lowe announces that in this contest there will be the first women welders to help build a Liberty ship, because they had only just gotten their Boilermaker union cards. And so that's the setting. Okay. Mickey Thomas, come on up and introduce these gals. A beefy guy lumbered up in a suit he seemed to have borrowed from someone 2 sizes smaller. 3 women followed and lined up on stage to his right. He called out names, which I missed. He exuded the enthusiasm of a turnip. Not exactly a cheerleader for the woman welder thing. Might not be too easy for Lowe to coax his shipbuilder's commitment. I struggled to observe much about the 3 women at a distance, other than that they wore working clothes, 2 in jumpsuits, 1 in heavy pants and a plaid shirt with buttons and patches, 2 with bandanas around their hair, the 3rd in a helmet. They all wore heavy shoes. One of them had clipped dark, worn gloves to her belt. Their gumption radiated, riveting me. I rarely saw women who looked so ready to work, as if that was what they were there for, rather than just to be decorative. Ever since I'd pretended to be a boy to get my first job at the Prospect, I'd learned the difference clothes could make in the way you did your work. It had a lot to do with pockets. Let me just show you. I only wear dresses with pockets. So. Men had them, women didn't, as if men had cash to carry and women didn't, which often enough was true. Where I had worked, I was almost always the only woman in the room with pockets. So that was that section.
Yeah. Now, the clothing truly is an extension of their tools, and we can thank Rosie's for our pockets today. I'm glad. I guess, Shelley, you do such a great job of depicting this home front moment and the danger, the excitement, everything in between. And I think sometimes, or for a long time, Rosies were overlooked for their contribution. And now we see them as soldiers without guns or serving on the home front. And so do you have any comments on that theme? You do a great job describing it in the book. I recommend delving into that. But did you have any thoughts to share?
I think what I have is a sense that many women's stories are not known to us. And of course that was true deep in history. They just weren't being written and reported. But I don't want to cry here, but my mother-in-law, Joan, died this week. Oh, awful, awful. But my biggest regret is I really didn't ever grill her about when she was 20 and the things she experienced, the history she experienced, the difficulties. And so I really feel that it's not just me, it's not just my own mother and my mother-in-law and my grandmothers. I know we all have elders in our family with stories to tell that are historically significant. But if we don't have the conversations, we can't know to what degree they were soldiers without guns. We cannot know the fights they fought for patriotic reasons, economic reasons, personal reasons. And everything I want to do is to honor people whose stories haven't been told. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so sorry for your loss. And just that potent reminder, you guys, to take your family's oral histories. It's a practice we do at the Trust in the Park. You can always send your stories into us, and we can bank them however we can. And, yeah, keep that history alive. Shelley, do we need to do a time check at all? Are we okay on time? Time? 7:30. Okay, perfect. Yeah. I guess I wanted to come back to you a little bit, Shelley. Female writer writing about female protagonists and antagonists and their barriers. And was there any significant barriers for you getting to where you are today as a writer?
That's a great question. First of all, I'm just about as entitled as I could be. I've had a great life and always have had a great life. My parents, my family, my schools, everybody was organized around me in support of what I wanted to do. And then in adulthood, my husband, my kids, I always say I have a computer mouse that says protagonist because I feel like I've always been encouraged to be the protagonist of my own story. So there are no real complaints there. But I will say it did, talking about these books with younger people, I had an experience not too long ago. I attended a college that's called Claremont McKenna College. Oh, yes. And Suzanne, you will relate to this. When Suzanne and I entered Claremont McKenna College, it was called Claremont Men's College. And the year that we entered as freshmen, we were the first women to attend 4 years. There were 25 women in our class, 25. We have a lot of best friends and great experiences and, frankly, husbands that came out of that. I'm embarrassed to admit. But I will also say that when Suzanne and I and our other friends who went to Claremont Men's College together get together and tell our stories, they weren't all good. They were not. there was a lot of times when the women were treated badly in these circumstances. And not too long ago, I gave a talk at Claremont McKenna College with a very large group of students, and I felt very insecure. I felt like such a poser to be talking to these lovely college students about my writing. And a number of students said, what I like about your character is she reminds me how I feel like I don't really belong here. That I might have earned my way in, but I don't really belong. And I realized, maybe that's been kind of cooking in me for a long time, that feeling like you have to keep proving yourself over and over and over again. It's never a settled fact. Even for me, who comes from great resources, even I felt like that. And so I think that probably was in there and probably drew me to topics like this, that I wondered, why wasn't I already good enough to feel at ease in my own skin in the place? Yeah.
And maybe in that question, there's an answer, but is there a significant message or theme you want these readers to, hone in on and take home today from this novel/series? It is part of a series.
Well, part of it is that I want you to understand there have always been ambitious women. Always in history, there have been ambitious women. And, because I have 2 sons and they have 2 female partners, they struggle sometimes with that, as I mentioned before. But women have always wanted to prove their worth, their competence, their professional dignity. It just was a lot harder. Sometimes I worry that people forget about what happened in history related to topics like that. And one of the dangers of forgetting is that it turns out history is cyclical. The things you thought you solved are not solved. So, as I'll badly paraphrase Joan Didion, the writer, to say that you have to know your history because it will come rapping on the side of your head in the middle of the night and make you remember. You have to know the way things were so you recognize them when they come back around, which happens to be the case in the world we're living in right now. So it's like a love of history, an appreciation that understanding what's happened historically is relevant to what's happening to you right now and today. I will say that when I finished writing Tomboy, it was in September of 1939 in the book. And right then, that's when World War II was officially beginning. And at that moment that I was writing, Russia was invading Ukraine. And I had just written about a page from a newspaper about Germany invading Poland. And I went back and forth between those front page articles, and I was shocked at how similar the language was and the explanation for the cause and the encouragement not to pay attention to it. So I think the thing is, pay attention. The history matters, and it helps us deal with now as well.
Awesome. And do you see your novel contributing to the mission of Rosie the Riveter Trust and our mission to preserve and share the stories of Rosies? Do you see the connection there, and can you draw that out for us?
I hope so, because I can't remember if I told you this, that in my first novel, Copy Boy, did I tell you I used a story from my dad's life? Okay. And he said, that's not what happened, but it's true. Because I borrowed his facts and I altered them for my fictive needs, hoping to get to the truth about how people feel, what happens to them, how do they react. And so I'm not a historian, as so many people who do work with Rosie the Riveter Trust are. There are oral histories there that will knock your socks off if you haven't delved into them. That's your go-to source. This is another way into the stories. I've always been someone who learns history best through story rather than through facts. So I hope that this novel will contribute to people's understanding of the historical facts.
Thank you. Anything else, Shelley, that's resonating with you tonight that you'd like to share before we move on to some questions and answers from the audience?
Well, one of the things that resonates for me in this room tonight is not just, it's kind of related to what you quoted from one of the Living Rosies earlier. It's that the study of history is important and it's serious and it matters. But you know, there's a lot of joy in this room. There are people in pretty good outfits. There's a lot of joy at recognizing the history, telling the stories, supporting the good cause. It's serious business, and it's also a lot of fun. There's joy in it. Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone, round of applause for Shelley Blanton-Stroud. And we will open up. If anybody has any questions for either of us, please do raise your hand. We also have a chat online if you want to put your question in the chat. And we'll start right here.
When's the movie coming out?
From your lips to God's ear. Known movie at this point.
Yes?
Do I need to read the first 2 books, or can I stay up all night?
Yes, you don't need, you know.
And do you want to repeat the questions
yes,
just for the
that's
online
right.
audience, if that's okay?
The question was, do you need to read them in order, or can they be read as standalones? And actually, I tried to write them as standalones and to do sort of backflashes to let you know things that happened previously. But I think you might want to go back and read, well, what was that about? And find out more previously. But they're written as standalones. You do not have to read them in order. I was recently at a bookstore in Folsom called Ruby's Books, fantastic bookstore. Anyway, the bookseller said she thinks there needs to be a name in the book industry for the kind of book that's part of a series, but it doesn't have to happen in order. Just kind of a standalone series. I think she's right, so I'm going to lose a little sleep on that tonight and call her in the morning. So.
You need a file.
From the husband, everybody. Sarah?
Okay, I'm reading this because this is coming from online. And it says, one of the things I love about your Jane Benjamin series is that although it takes place in the past, the characters' actions, thoughts, and emotions feel very relatable and have a present-day urgency. Was that intentional?
Oh, great. I love that. Well, first of all, it's this kind of a style preference that I love historical fiction, but I don't like it to get too precious. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like the dialect or the, oh, my dear, or, you know, I don't know. I don't like the language to get too precious. I like them to be a little bit grittier. And I find, and I even like that was a little bit inspired by a lot of music I listen to, like alt roots music, where it feels old and also feels like now. That's a style preference as far as I'm concerned. But when people ask me about events in my novels that are relevant to what we're going through today, I honestly don't go hunting in history for like, oh, let's put abortion in here on purpose because da-da-da. The truth is, what happens is I go reading through history and I can't help put in something that's relevant today because of that repetition. So, yes, I find historical fiction really contemporary at the same time. That's the pleasure spot for me, where old and new meet and rub up against each other. Yeah.
Yes, right here.
So I'm relatively new as a resident of the area, and I have not I'm a virgin. That said, you spoke about how the museum or the foundation or the trust honors the diversity of those who showed up to work. And you spoke about the context of what's relevant now is relevant then. Your main character is a white woman. One of the things about living here is the presence of folks of color, particularly the role of Black women in the war history. So how, can you give me a heads up so that I can look forward to how Black women serve in your historical fiction in a way that honors their extraordinary contributions?
It's a huge weight as a writer to know how best and ideally to do this. There is no question but that the shipyards benefited from the labor of Black women. And in fact, that the entire complexion of this region, literally complexion, changed in these war years when people traveled from all over the United States hoping to avoid Jim Crow scenarios that they had grown up with, coming to California to work in the shipyards and to be given a fair shake. And truly many people did get a much better shake and a better pay by coming here. But it is within the book, it is very clear that there is one important character who, because she's Black and she's very talented at welding, she is not able to weld. She's limited to a clerk role that will not pay her as well as the women who are welding will get paid. So it is definitely a part of this book. And yet I was very squeamish about going into it too deeply because it's not 100% my story to tell. So I do it as carefully as I can, relying on oral histories and on memoir in order to do that, because it's an important part of the history. Thank you.
Thanks for putting it in there.
Do we got anybody else out there with questions? One here?
Hi there. Hi, Shelley. I wanted to just ask about, I'm particularly interested in the very young women who were in the hinterland, Nebraska and Iowa and elsewhere, who 17-year-olds who saw the war as an opportunity to get out of town and travel to Oakland and to Seattle and to other places as a calling for the war. What did you learn about very young women who came out to work in the war effort?
Well, I think the Rosie the Riveter Museum provides us a starting point on those kinds of stories. One of the main characters in my novel, Toots, is one such woman. You know, she's young. She wants a little adventure. She's not unlike a lot of the young men at that time who thought, oh yeah, I'm going to go fight Hitler over in Europe. That'll be fun. I'll get to see Paris. This will be great. You know, and we're a little stunned at the complexity of that choice and that opportunity. But the same thing with the women, that is one angle. That's one petal on that daisy of why do you come here? A good number of young women thought, this is my way out. I no longer have to sell lipstick at Woolworth. I can go, the phrase that I learned at the Rosie the Riveter Museum was, I can sew with fire. Yeah.
And a connection that I found in Toots is to our real Rosie friend, Mary Torres, actually. So she's got that fire in her, you know, she's a firecracker. And our Rosie Mary Torres left her family a note, her parents a note at 17 years old, and just took a bus to California to start working in the shipyard. So it's kind of that spirit of like young adventure. And yes, it's very much captured in the character Toots.
I will add to that I met Ruby, it's Ruby, right? Who's 36 years a welder herself. So right on, Ruby. I met Ruby tonight, and she saw the cover and said, "Oh, that's Woo Woo," and I keep getting her regular name confused, but Woo Woo was really the most famously photographed woman welder. Well, just so you know, my cover designer, I sent her the picture of Woo Woo, and she went on Etsy and she sourced clothes from that year that Woo Woo was wearing. So if you see the picture of Woo Woo in real life, Toots here is wearing almost identical the same outfit of the adventurer girl. Yeah.
I see one in the back there. Yes. So, we talk about this movement, oh, yes. So the question was, what happened to these women after the war? Where did they go? What happened? So we do address this at the visitor center as well. We see this movement of millions of women entering the wartime production jobs. And then when the men came back from war, they were asked to leave. They were told to go back home or wherever they came from. And I like to think that we couldn't put the cat back in the bag after that, right? The change had already started. They've already proved themselves. They've already done the job just as well. So though we did see that rapid decline in them actually occupying the jobs, they already put their foot in the door and led that way for future women to come through.
It's kind of like that. I think this is from World War I, that phrase, how are you going to keep them down once they've seen Paris, right? I think that once the women understood that they could do very hard work and get paid and recognized for it, it was very hard to tamp that down and act like it didn't matter anymore. But there were, even though that time period was so difficult, a lot of those oral histories share those women saying, I was destitute to lose that work. And you can understand how the soldiers coming back from war needed their jobs, right? You could understand where that came from. But definitely that probably created some of the angst and the dissatisfaction that led to the women's movement a lot more explicitly.
Yes, some of the starts of some of the most large cultural movements for civil rights started in the 40s because of World War II. So, we saw the starts of something, cat couldn't get put back in the bag, and then it continued in the decades to follow. I don't see any more hands. I don't know if anyone's online. Looks like I've got one more.
Did they hang out after work? Was it like a fellowship, camaraderie? Were they friends? Were they pals? Did they go out and do stuff?
Yeah. The question is, did they also have fun after work together? And definitely, you've heard that from the still living Rosies and in the oral histories. I wish I could remember things better. I really dug around to find a bar that was open at that time that they would have gone to. And it does appear in the novel. I'm just embarrassed that I can't remember the name of the bar. But it was one where the Rosies would go and they would drink. I also was very interested to learn, as a bourbon drinker myself, that you couldn't get bourbon. It was just soldier beer. You had to, find a bar that had a really old dusty bottle behind the bar. So,
I think.
Yes.
I think we'd see someone to tag on to that.
was this amazing amalgamation of a barber shop and a dining room and a nightclub where blues musicians would come and perform because it became a safe communal place where Black men and women could gather and feel safe. So it was the other side of it.
That's right.
And then one more fun anecdote from one of our Rosie friends is she was worried about us young ladies and how we're going to meet boys if we don't have dances going on around. So, maybe it's time to bring the dances back after work if anyone's trying to meet somebody else out there. Well, I think we're out of questions. So, one more. Last one.
That is such a fascinating question. And the question was if there's any record of how many of these Rosies then went on to higher education and advanced their careers in that way. I really don't know. Do you know, Sarah Jo?
I only really have one reference. Again, I'm talking to my Rosie friends about their stories, and we have Rosie Marion Sousse, who left high school and went into a 6-week drafting course at UC Berkeley. And that is how she got her start into the shipyard as a draftsperson. So I think that there was more of an urgency to just get right into the jobs than there was to necessarily go on to higher education. But that 6-week course really proved well for her. She would end up editing the men's blueprints, and she actually made changes to when her house was built with her family. She had that knowledge to then go apply it in the future.
I'll add one thing there that I really hadn't thought about until you asked that question. But, when so many men and some women returned from war, there was the GI Bill. And the GI Bill radically changed the population when people could go to university and the government would take care of it. But, there wasn't a GI Bill for the women who were welders in the shipyards. They didn't have that same scholarship in a way. So it's a great question, really fascinating to think about.
Okay, last one.
I was going to say, it sounds like your next book needs to be in the maybe early 50s, and it really takes on Ivy League.
The next book is going to be set in 1945, and it takes place during VJ Day. And this one though Jane will be in this book, it's a different protagonist. It's the first female publisher who's inherited the newspaper from her husband. On VJ Day, of course, there were celebrations across the country and across the world. San Francisco was the only place where the VJ Day celebration turned into a deadly riot. And there were something like 1,000 people hospitalized, 11 people killed in the riots, and 6 women raped. And it was not publicized. It was not in the papers. It was not pursued by lawyers and police officers, by mayors or governors. And it was because it got in the way of the necessary narrative of a positive end to war. So I think that one's going to take me longer to write.
We will be patiently waiting for it. And thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. Shelley will be signing books if you want to bring your book up. We do have merch for sale in the form of a fundraiser for our youth programs. Do like and follow us, all that good stuff. Stay tuned. And you can always visit the Visitor Center 7 days a week. It's free, open 10 to 5. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.